The sun was already low when Caleb Mercer turned his old truck off the highway and into the gravel lot of the small diner that sat alone on the edge of the Wyoming road. The sign above the door flickered with a buzzing sound, giving off just enough light to make the place look alive even though only 2 cars were parked outside. Caleb wasn't one for late dinners, but he had been driving since early morning, hauling feed and checking fences on the far side of his land. His stomach reminded him it had been hours since he last ate anything more than a piece of jerky. Inside, the diner was warm and smelled of coffee and fresh pie. 2 things Caleb never said no to. The radio played an old country song, the kind that made the place feel calm, almost safe in its quiet way. Only one waitress worked behind the counter, and she moved quickly, as if she wanted to stay busy. Caleb had never seen her before. In a small town like his, new faces stood out, especially ones that seemed unsure of where they belonged. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain shirt like most waitresses did, but something about her was different. Her hands trembled slightly when she picked up cups or wiped tables, and she kept checking the windows as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. When Caleb sat down, she hurried over with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. Please," he replied gently. She poured it, and Caleb noticed she held the pot a little too tightly, like she was afraid it might slip from her hands. Her name tag said, Anna, but the letters looked newly printed, too clean compared to the worn-out tags the other diner workers usually wore. "Long day?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Pretty long," Caleb said, lifting his cup. "Hard to keep up with ranch work when winter's around the corner." She nodded, though she didn't seem to be listening. Her eyes drifted toward the door again. Caleb wasn't someone who liked to get in other people's business, but he had spent most of his life reading the moods of animals and people. Something about this young woman felt unsettled, like a skittish horse ready to bolt. "What can I get for you?" she asked, snapping her attention back to him. "Just a burger and fries," Caleb said, "and maybe a slice of that apple pie." "I'll get that started." She walked away quickly. Caleb watched her for a moment, then forced himself to look down at his menu even though he already knew what he wanted. He didn't want to stare. People didn't usually appreciate being watched, especially when they had something on their mind. As he waited, he looked around the diner. A couple sat in a corner booth sharing a plate of onion rings. An older man read his newspaper at the counter. It was an ordinary scene, the kind that made the world feel steady. But the young waitress didn't fit into that peaceful picture. Each time the bell on the door jingled, she stiffened, then relaxed only after seeing it was just another traveler or local stopping in. A few minutes later, she brought out his food. The plate shook slightly in her hand, so Caleb reached out to steady it before she set it down. "Thank you," he said kindly. "Everything okay?" "Yes," she answered too quickly. Then she corrected herself. "I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine. Just a little tired." Her smile was still polite but clearly forced. Caleb didn't push. He simply nodded and started his meal. The burger was good, better than he expected, and the warm fries eased some of the day's weariness. He could feel the tension drain from his shoulders. After ranch chores, even a simple meal could feel comforting. But the waitress kept catching his eye. Not intentionally, she seemed to be doing her best to stay invisible, but because her nervousness was hard to ignore. She dropped a spoon at one point, jumping like the sound startled her more than it should have. She apologized to no one in particular, picked it up, and went straight back to wiping a table with quick, distracted motions. Caleb finished his food and took another sip of his coffee. When she passed his table again, he decided to speak gently, hoping to offer reassurance without prying. "Ma'am, you don't look tired," he said softly. She paused mid-step, the cloth in her hand twisting. For a moment, it seemed she might say something, but then she swallowed hard and forced another smile. "I'm okay. Really." But her voice trembled in a way that made it clear she didn't believe her own words. Caleb let it go. Folks had a right to their secrets. He wasn't about to make her uncomfortable. When he finished eating, he reached into his wallet, placed a couple of bills on the table, and stood up to leave. She hurried to the register before he reached it, as if wanting to finish his check quickly. "That'll be $10.40, she said quietly. He handed her a 20. As she tried to give him change, the coins slipped out of her hand and scattered across the counter. She gasped, lightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, rushing to pick them up. "Take your time," Caleb said, kneeling to help her gather a few quarters that rolled toward the end of the counter. She managed a small laugh, more nervous than amused. "Guess I'm clumsy tonight." Caleb didn't correct her. He could tell clumsiness wasn't the real problem. When she finally handed him the change, their eyes met for a brief second. Hers were full of something he couldn't name, fear mixed with hesitation, as if she wanted to ask him something but couldn't bring herself to do it. "Well," Caleb said, tipping his hat lightly. "You have a good night." "You too," she murmured. He stepped outside. The cool air felt refreshing after the warm diner. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward his truck. The sky above was dark, except for a faint glow of stars pushing through the thin clouds. It was peaceful, the kind of night Caleb usually enjoyed. But before he could reach his truck door, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. "Sir, wait, please." He turned, surprised to see the waitress running toward him. She stopped a few feet away, breathing quickly, her expression tense. Caleb lifted a brow. "Something wrong?" She looked around the parking lot first, as if making sure no one else was there. Only the dim lights from the diner and his truck's reflection shone on the gravel. Then she stepped closer, lowered her voice, and spoke the words that made Caleb freeze in place. "I'm not who you ordered," she whispered. The tone of her voice wasn't playful or teasing. It was heavy with meaning, as if she expected him to understand something hidden beneath the words. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't a man who scared easily, but those words felt like something important, something fragile and urgent. He stared at her, confused. "Ma'am, I don't know what you mean." She glanced at his truck again, specifically at the ranch logo, stamped on the side. Her hands shook just slightly, and she pressed them together, as if trying to steady herself. "You came in with that truck," she said softly. "And I thought maybe you were one of the people looking for someone else." "Someone I'm not." Caleb's eyebrows pulled together. He took a slow breath, trying to make sense of her words without jumping to conclusions. "I didn't order anyone," he said calmly. "I was just getting dinner." For a moment, she simply stared at him, her eyes wide as though trying to determine if she could trust him. She looked less frightened now, but not yet calm. The night breeze tugged at her hair, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if she were suddenly cold. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have said anything." "It's all right," Caleb replied. "But it seems like something's bothering you." She opened her mouth to speak, but footsteps sounded from inside the diner. Another worker leaned out the door and called her name, Anna, the name on her tag. She flinched, then took a step back from Caleb. "I have to go," she said quickly. Please forget I said anything." Before Caleb could respond, she turned and hurried back inside, slipping through the door as if afraid to be seen in the parking lot too long. Caleb stood beside his truck for a long moment, staring at the door she disappeared through. The night no longer felt peaceful. Her words echoed in his mind, repeating themselves like a whisper the wind carried past him. "I'm not who you ordered." He didn't know what they meant, not yet. But he knew one thing clearly. The young woman inside that diner was scared. And whatever she was afraid of wasn't something simple. She wasn't just tired or stressed. Her fear was real, and it sat heavy on Caleb's chest as he climbed into his truck. He didn't drive away right away. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, thinking about her trembling voice and the way she looked over her shoulder every few seconds. Ranch life had taught him to trust instincts, and right now his instincts were telling him that something was wrong, deeply wrong. He looked back toward the diner windows where she moved about, trying to act normal. Caleb didn't know her story, but he knew this. She wasn't pretending for no reason, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt himself pulled into someone else's trouble she hadn't chosen and didn't know how to escape. Caleb drove only a short distance from the diner before pulling onto a quiet stretch of road. He didn't know why he stopped. Maybe it was the look in the young woman's eyes. Maybe it was her strange whisper that clung to his thoughts like dust on his boots. Whatever the reason, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just brushed past him, something he wasn't supposed to ignore. He sat for a moment with the engine humming softly. The night was peaceful, but he wasn't. The young woman's voice kept echoing through his mind. "I'm not who you ordered." It made no sense. He wasn't the kind of man who knew anything about ordering anyone. He lived a simple life on his ranch, and the only thing he ever ordered was feed for his cattle. After a long minute, he shook his head and put the truck in gear. He didn't get far. He had barely driven another mile when he saw movement in his rearview mirror, a small figure running down the road, waving her arms. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as he slowed down, he realized it was the waitress from the diner. He stopped the truck and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. "Ma'am?" he called out gently. She reached him out of breath, holding her sides, her face pale in the moonlight. "Please," she said softly. I need to talk to you." Caleb nodded and opened the passenger door. "You can sit. You look like you ran a long way." She hesitated only a second before climbing in. Her hands were shaking again. But this time it wasn't from tiredness, it was from something deeper. Caleb got in on his side and kept the engine running for warmth. He didn't move the truck, didn't ask questions. He simply waited. It took her a moment to catch her breath before she spoke. "My name isn't Anna," she said finally. "I figured," Caleb replied gently. "My real name is Maria. Maria Ellis." He nodded. "All right, Maria. You're safe in this truck. No one's going to bother you here. You can tell me whatever you feel comfortable sharing." She looked at him with eyes full of hesitation. It was clear she wanted to trust him. But trust didn't come easy for her, not anymore. "I left home about 6 months ago," she said quietly. "I thought I was leaving for a better life. Someone promised me a job and a place to stay. But when I arrived..." She stopped and took a slow breath. "Nothing was like they said. They took my things and said I owed them money for helping me get there. They made me do work I didn't agree to. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. I felt trapped." She didn't describe details, and Caleb didn't ask for them. He didn't need the whole story to understand she had been caught in something harmful and controlling. "I didn't know how to leave," she continued, "but last week, I found a chance. One of the women I worked with whispered that I should run while people were distracted. I grabbed a jacket and walked until my feet hurt too much to keep going." Caleb stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. "I made it as far as the edge of Wyoming," she said, "and that diner was the only place hiring. I thought working there would give me a chance to disappear for a while. I've been using a fake name because I'm scared someone might still be looking for me." Caleb felt a heaviness in his chest, not anger, not fear, but a deep sadness that someone so young had gone through such uncertainty. Yet he kept his face calm and open, wanting her to feel steady. "I understand," he said softly. "You've been trying to stay safe." She nodded. "I know it sounds strange, but when I saw your truck..." She looked down at her lap. "The people I escaped from sometimes did business in rural areas. I've seen trucks with ranch logos before. Some of them were connected to those men. I thought maybe yours was too." Caleb straightened slightly, not out of offense, but out of surprise. "I can see why you might think that," he said. "But I don't have any connection to people who would treat others like that. I'm a simple rancher. That's all I am." Maria closed her eyes briefly, relief loosening her shoulders. "I believe you now," she said quietly. "When you were in the diner, you didn't act like the others. They always carried themselves in a certain way, like they expected people to move aside for them. You didn't. You just looked tired and kind." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not ones spoken with such sincerity. He cleared his throat. "So when you whispered, 'I'm not who you ordered,'" he said slowly. She looked embarrassed. "It was the only way I could think to see if you were one of them. It was a phrase they used when they talked about things." She paused and corrected herself gently. "When they talked about the people they brought in, I figured if you reacted like you knew what it meant, I'd run. If you reacted like you didn't, then maybe you weren't one of them. Caleb let out a soft breath. Well, you definitely confused me. But I'm glad it helped you figure things out. I'm sorry for saying it, she whispered. You don't have to apologize for trying to protect yourself. She blinked fast, as if holding back emotions she didn't want to show. Thank you, she said in a small voice. Caleb noticed her wiping her palms on her jeans. She was trembling more now, even though she was no longer running. It wasn't the cold, it was fear that had settled into her bones and refused to leave. Maria, he asked gently, are you in danger right now? She hesitated. I don't know, she whispered. The people I used to work for. They don't like it when someone leaves. I don't know if they're looking for me. But I didn't want to take a chance staying in one place for too long. That's why you kept checking the diner door, Caleb said. She nodded. Every time the bell rang, I thought it might be them. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, thinking carefully. Do you have anyone you can call? Family? Her face softened for a moment. I have a younger sister, but I don't want her mixed up in this. She's still in school and deserves a peaceful life. I haven't talked to her in months. What about friends? She shook her head. Caleb looked at her gently. Then you've been handling all of this alone. Yes, she swallowed. And I'm tired. Really tired. Her shoulders slumped as if the admission itself had stolen the last of her strength. Caleb wasn't a man who took risks lightly. He lived simply, followed routines, and kept to himself. But he was also a man who couldn't turn away from someone who needed help, especially someone as lost and frightened as Maria. Listen, he said quietly. You're welcome to come to my ranch for the night. It's quiet there. Nobody passes by unless they're lost or visiting neighbors. You can rest, eat something warm, and figure out what you want to do next. Her eyes widened in surprise. I don't want to cause trouble for you. Londid. You're not, Caleb said firmly. I'm offering because everyone deserves a safe place, even if just for one night. She watched him closely, searching for any sign of hidden intentions, but there were none. Caleb's sincerity was simple, honest, and steady qualities she hadn't seen in a long time. Okay, she whispered at last. Just for tonight, Caleb offered a small smile. Just for tonight, he repeated. And tomorrow, we'll decide what to do next together. You won't have to figure everything out alone. Maria let out a breath she must have been holding for months. It wasn't a full sigh of relief, but it was the closest she had come in a long time. Caleb put the truck in gear and drove slowly through the quiet night. The sky grew darker, and the stars spread overhead like tiny lanterns. Maria sat beside him, shoulders still tense, but her breathing calmer now. After a few miles, she spoke quietly. Thank you for stopping. I couldn't just leave after hearing what you said, Caleb replied. She looked out the window at the passing fields and whispered, I didn't think anyone would help me. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was warm. Well, you found someone who will. Maria didn't answer, but her expression softened, and for the first time since he met her, Caleb saw a hint of hope in her eyes, small, faint, but there. They drove into the night, two strangers connected by a single whispered sentence, heading toward a ranch that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The road to Caleb's ranch was long and quiet, stretching through open fields and gentle hills that looked silver under the soft moonlight. Maria sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape. She wasn't relaxed, but she wasn't trembling anymore either. Caleb could sense the shift, small, but real. Beautiful night, he said softly, not to fill the silence but to help her breathe easier. Maria nodded. I haven't seen the sky this clear in a long time. That's one thing Wyoming never fails at, Caleb said with a small smile. Open skies. She returned a tiny smile of her own, quick, but real. As they drove farther from town, the road narrowed, turning from pavement to gravel. The sound changed too. Instead of the smooth hum of tires on asphalt, it became a steady, crunching rhythm. Caleb's truck bumped lightly over small dips and ridges. Maria didn't mind. It reminded her that she was getting farther from the diner and, hopefully, farther from her fears. But the quiet didn't last. Halfway to the ranch, Caleb glanced into the rearview mirror and noticed a pair of headlights in the distance. He didn't think much of it at first. People sometimes use the road to get to nearby ranches, but after a few minutes, the car behind them didn't turn off onto any of the side roads. It followed the same path, keeping a steady pace. Maria noticed it too. Her back straightened, and her hands curled inward, almost like she was bracing herself. "Is that car always behind us?" she asked quietly. Caleb didn't want to worry her. But he also wasn't someone who lied. "It might just be someone heading the same way," he said gently. "There are a few ranches past mine." Maria nodded, but he could tell the headlights unsettled her. After another few minutes, the car slowed down when they slowed down, and sped up slightly when they did. Maria's breathing turned shallow. "Caleb," she whispered, "I think they're following us." Caleb kept his voice calm. "Could be a coincidence. But what if it's not?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Caleb took a slow inhale. It didn't sit right with him either. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but he also couldn't ignore her instincts. She knew the behavior of the people she had run from far better than he did. "Let's do this," Caleb said gently. "I'm turning off up ahead. If they follow, then we'll know they're not just heading home." Maria nodded silently, her eyes glued to the mirror. Caleb turned the steering wheel and guided the truck onto a small dirt road that led through a patch of pines. It wasn't the usual route to his ranch, but it was an old side path he sometimes used during calving season. The headlights behind them paused. Maria held her breath. Then the car slowly eased onto the same dirt road. She whispered, barely audible, "Oh no." Caleb kept his voice steady. "Easy now. Nothing's going to happen. We've got options. But what if they're looking for me?" she asked, her voice trembling again. "We don't know yet," Caleb said softly. "And until we know, we'll be careful." The road curved, but Caleb kept the truck moving smoothly. The forest around them thickened, the trees closing in like shadows under the moonlight. The headlights behind them glowed faintly between the trunks, steady and persistent. Maria hugged herself and looked out the window. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your doorstep." "You didn't bring trouble," Caleb replied gently. "Trouble shows up on its own sometimes. But you're not alone. Okay? We'll figure this out." Number 4. Alder video. Number 4. Number 4. And Caleb replies, "Alder video." She nodded but didn't look entirely convinced. After a moment, Caleb slowed the truck and spoke in a calm, thoughtful tone. "I know a place up ahead," he said. "An old line shack. It's just a small wooden building I use during busy seasons. We can pull off there and wait a while. If that car is truly following us, we'll know soon." Maria watched him with wide eyes, trusting him more with every mile. The line shack appeared after another 10 minutes, a small structure at the edge of a clearing, barely visible unless you knew it was there. Caleb drove behind it and shut off the truck's lights. They both sat silently, listening. The night seemed still. Then they heard tires rolling slowly along the dirt path. Maria tensed so much that she barely breathed. But then, just as the car neared the clearing, the sound began to fade. The vehicle continued straight down the road, moving past the shack and disappearing into the distance. Caleb exhaled. Looks like they were just heading somewhere else. Maria leaned back in her seat, relief softening her shoulders. "Maybe I was scared for nothing." "There's nothing wrong with being cautious," Caleb said gently, "especially with everything you've been through." She nodded slowly. The truck felt warmer now, as if the fear had lifted enough to let the natural quiet of the night settle around them. "Would you like to rest inside the shack for a bit?" Caleb asked. "It's small, but safe." "No," she whispered. "I'm all right staying here. Being close to you makes me feel safer." The words surprised Caleb. Not in a romantic way, she didn't say them like someone seeking affection. She said them like someone who had been alone far too long and suddenly found a person who didn't want anything from her except to help. Caleb nodded. We can stay here as long as you want. Maria watched the stars through the windshield. It's strange, she said quietly. I didn't think anyone would care. I've been so used to taking care of myself that I forgot what it felt like for someone to listen. I'm listening now, Caleb replied. She turned her head toward him. I don't even know how to thank you. You don't need to. You just needed help. That's reason enough. Maria looked down at her hands. Do you think there's a chance I can start over? For real this time? Of course, Caleb said firmly. Everyone gets another chance. Sometimes more than one. What if the people from before try to find me? They have friends in different places. We'll handle it one step at a time, Caleb assured her. Tomorrow, I'll call someone I trust. My wife's cousin. He works in law enforcement. But he's an honest man. He can guide us without putting you at risk. Maria's eyes widened with concern. I don't want trouble for you or your family. Caleb shook his head. You're not causing trouble. And I don't have family at home anymore. My wife passed away a few years ago. It's just me on the ranch now. Maria's expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. It's been a few years, but it still feels strange to come home to an empty house. Maria hesitated, then asked softly, Does it feel lonely? Some days, Caleb admitted. But tonight, I'm glad I stopped at that diner. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there when you needed someone. Maria's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears away before they could form. I'm glad you were there too, she whispered. The air outside was crisp but not cold. A light breeze rustled the leaves. The shack, though old, stood quietly like a small guardian of their momentary pause from the world. After a long moment of silence, Maria spoke again. Caleb, do you think people can go back to being whole? After feeling lost for so long? Caleb looked out at the treetops silhouetted against the sky. I think people are stronger than they believe, he said. Even when life gets heavy, there's always a part inside us that wants to stand up again. Maria absorbed his words with quiet relief. I want to believe that. You will, Caleb promised. She gave him a small smile, tired, but hopeful. Thank you. You're welcome. They stayed there a little longer, letting the quiet settle around them. The world outside felt still, as if giving them permission to breathe slowly again. When the road had been silent long enough to feel safe, Caleb started the truck. Ready to keep going? He asked. Maria nodded. As they drove the remaining distance to the ranch, the worry in her face softened. The headlights that had once frightened her were long gone. The road ahead, though dark, felt like a safer path, a path toward something new. And as the ranch finally came into view, its porch light glowing warmly in the distance, Maria whispered something so soft Caleb almost didn't hear it. It feels like I'm heading toward a life I didn't think I'd ever get. Caleb glanced at her, saw the fragile hope in her expression, and replied gently, Then let's make sure you get it. Morning sunlight slowly filled the sky as a soft golden glow spread across Caleb's quiet ranch. The wide fields, the wooden fences, and the small barn looked peaceful, untouched by the worries of the night before. Birds chirped from the trees, greeting the day with cheerful voices. Inside the ranch house, Maria woke up on the small guest bed Caleb had prepared for her. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The room felt too calm, too gentle, compared to the places she had stayed in before. But when she sat up and saw the soft quilt Caleb had given her, the memory of the previous night returned. She let out a slow, relieved sigh. It had been a long time since she had slept without jumping awake from fear. Even though she still felt unsure about the future, she had slept more peacefully on that humble guest bed than she had in months. Caleb was already up. She heard the quiet clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the low hum of the kettle. She got dressed and walked out, hesitating for a moment before stepping into the kitchen doorway. Caleb turned and smiled warmly when he saw her. Morning, he said. Hope you slept all right. Maria nodded shyly. Better than I expected. Thank you. I made breakfast, Caleb said. It's nothing fancy, just oatmeal and some fruit. But it'll keep you full for a while. Maria sat at the table while Caleb placed a bowl in front of her. She stirred the oatmeal slowly, feeling almost overwhelmed by the simple kindness. "This is really nice," she said softly. Caleb poured himself some coffee and sat across from her. "Good. You deserve a peaceful morning." For a moment, they ate quietly. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, warming the wooden floor. Everything felt calm, as if the ranch itself wanted Maria to feel safe. After they finished eating, Caleb set his coffee cup down and spoke gently. "Maria, I meant what I said last night. I want to help you figure out what comes next. But I can't do it without someone I trust." "You mean the sheriff you mentioned?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "Colton Briggs. He's my late wife's cousin. He's a good man, steady, honest. He doesn't let rumors or fear control his decisions." Maria's fingers tightened around her empty bowl. "Do you think he'll judge me? Or blame me for what happened?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "He won't blame you for anything. And he'll make sure you're treated with respect." Maria swallowed. "Okay. If you trust him, then I'll trust him too. I'll call him after we clean up," Caleb said. A small smile touched Maria's lips. "Thank you, Caleb. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me." "You don't need to thank me," he said gently. "Helping you feels like the right thing to do." They cleaned the dishes together, Maria carefully rinsing and Caleb placing them on the drying rack. It felt oddly comforting to share such a simple morning routine with someone after so many lonely months. When everything was tidy, Caleb stepped outside onto the porch to make the call, while Maria stayed near the window, watching nervously. He dialed Colton's number. It rang twice. "Caleb," came a warm, steady voice from the other end. "You're up early." "Morning, Colton. I need your help with something." Colton's tone shifted instantly. "What kind of help?" Caleb glanced through the window at Maria, who stood quietly, holding her hands together. "I picked up someone last night, a young woman who needs guidance. She left a situation that wasn't safe, and she's scared someone might try to find her." Colton didn't interrupt, letting Caleb speak. "She hasn't broken any laws. She just needs protection, and someone who knows the right steps to take. Someone who can make sure she's treated fairly. I didn't think the local office was the best place to bring her because, well, you mentioned you were keeping an eye on a few things there." Colton exhaled slowly. "You did the right thing calling me. I'll come by the ranch. Tell her she's not in trouble. We'll get her the help she needs." "Thanks," Caleb said sincerely. "Give me about an hour," Colton replied. "I'll be there soon." When Caleb went back inside, Maria stepped forward anxiously. "Is he coming?" she asked. "He is," Caleb said softly. "And he promised he's only coming to help." Maria nodded, though she still looked nervous. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he said. "No matter what." "No." An hour later, the sound of a car approaching made Maria stiffen. She stood by the window and watched as a sheriff's truck pulled up to the ranch. A tall man with calm eyes stepped out. He didn't walk with heavy steps or demanding authority. Instead, he approached the house with quiet confidence. Caleb opened the door and greeted him. "Morning, Colton." "Morning," Colton replied, shaking his hand. When Maria appeared behind Caleb, Colton gave her a soft smile. "You must be Maria. Thank you for trusting Caleb enough to talk with me." Maria lowered her gaze shyly. I'm sorry if I'm causing trouble." "Clouding mind." "You're not causing any trouble," Colton said gently. "You're asking for help, that's all." His voice was steady and kind, helping ease some of her fear. They sat at the kitchen table while Caleb brought over water for everyone. Colton listened patiently as Maria shared her story, not in deep detail, but enough for him to understand her situation. His expression never showed judgment or discomfort. Instead, he listened with genuine concern. "You've been very brave," he said when she finished. "Leaving an unsafe situation takes courage. And wanting a better future for yourself isn't something to apologize for. Maria's eyes watered slightly. I didn't feel brave. To do. Most brave people don't, Colton replied with a small smile. Then he explained gently what he could do for her. He could contact trusted state officers who were known for helping people in her situation. He could also make sure no one could take her somewhere without her agreement. Everything would be handled respectfully. You'll be able to start fresh, Colton assured her. A new place, a clean record, and people who make sure you're treated well. Maria looked at him with disbelief. I can really start over? Yes, he said warmly. You deserve a real chance. She wiped a small tear from her cheek. Caleb handed her a tissue without a word, and she took it with gratitude. After discussing details for a while, Colton made a few phone calls outside calls that arranged safe support, new identification help, and a temporary place for Maria to stay while things were sorted. Everything was done calmly, clearly, and respectfully. When Colton returned, he said, Things will move quickly now. We'll get you settled somewhere safe. But if you want to stay here for a few days to rest, that's completely fine too. Maria looked at Caleb. He nodded gently. You're welcome here as long as you need, he said. She smiled softly. Thank you. Over the next few days, life on the ranch followed a peaceful rhythm. Maria helped Caleb feed his animals, walked around the fields, and even helped check a few fences. She laughed gently when a curious calf nudged her hand. And Caleb noticed that each day she carried herself a little taller than the day before. She still had moments of uncertainty, but she also had moments of genuine hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Maria stood on the porch with Caleb, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. You know, she said quietly, I used to think life would always feel heavy. But being here, I feel lighter. Caleb glanced at her with a kind smile. You deserve lightness. She looked out over the land. I'm scared to leave, even though I know I have to. That's normal, Caleb said. New beginnings are scary, but they're also full of possibilities. Maria took a long breath. I hope one day I'll be strong enough to help someone else the way you helped me. You already are strong, Caleb said gently. You just don't see it yet. She looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. I'll never forget you, Caleb, and I'll never forget you either, he replied. A few days later, Colton returned with a small car and a gentle smile. Ready? He asked Maria. Maria held her small bag close and turned to Caleb. Her voice was soft but steady. Thank you for giving me a safe place and for believing in me. Caleb nodded, his eyes warm. Take care of yourself, Maria. You're going to do great things. She hugged him lightly, but full of emotion. I hope so. She stepped into the car, and as they pulled away, she waved through the window. Caleb lifted his hand in return, watching until the car disappeared down the quiet road. For a long moment, the ranch felt still. Caleb stood on his porch, hands in his pockets, thinking about the girl who had whispered such confusing words in the diner only days ago. I'm not who you ordered. She had been frightened, lost, unsure of the world. But now she was stepping into a future she had once believed she could never reach. Caleb smiled softly to himself. Sometimes, he thought, life brings the right people together at the right time even when neither person expects it. And as the sun rose the next morning over Caleb's ranch, it felt like a quiet promise. New beginnings belonged to everyone who dared to hope for them.